night was heavy with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old wooden beams in the house. Jack Turner, a freshman at Pine Hill University, had always dreamed of a fresh start, leaving behind the crowded streets of New York for a quiet life in the scenic New Hampshire countryside. But as he stepped into the grand, yet foreboding halls of Hollis Hall, something unsettling gripped him. A feeling he couldn't shake. The house, with its towering walls and antique charm, had a history, and that history, well, it wasn't exactly the kind you would find in textbooks. It began with whispers, quiet, almost imperceptible, but enough to set Jack's nerves on edge. At first, he chalked it up to the typical fears of settling into a new place. But when objects began to shift on their own, lights flickering as if responding to a silent command, and cold drafts swept through rooms without explanation, Jack couldn't dismiss it any longer. Something was wrong with Pine Hill, and whatever it was waiting for him to uncover the truth. With his curiosity piqued, Jack, alongside his best friend Lucas, would soon discover that some things, once known, are impossible to forget. Welcome to Pine Hill, a place where the past never truly stays buried, and the truth is much darker than they ever expected. As Jack and Lucas settled into their dorm room at Pine Hill University, the first few days seemed almost too normal. The campus was quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling streets of New York that Jack had left behind. He had hoped for peace, a chance to start fresh, but a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The university, nestled deep in the heart of the New Hampshire woods, was older than most. Hollis Hall, where Jack and Lucas were staying, had been around for over a century. Its brick facade was covered in ivy, giving it a timeless, almost ancient appearance. The hallways were long and narrow, with high ceilings that echoed footsteps, and the air always smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The more Jack explored, the more the building seemed to hold a history that was just out of reach, like a book with pages missing. And those missing pages were something Jack was beginning to feel drawn to. One night, as Jack walked down one of the long corridors to grab a late-night snack, he noticed something strange. A door at the end of the hall that he hadn't seen before. It was ajar, as if someone had been there but quickly left. Curiosity tugged at him. He stepped closer, peering through the crack. The room beyond was dark, but he could just make out old, dusty furniture covered in white sheets. The silence in the room felt almost too thick, like the building itself was holding its breath. Jack's heart raced as he considered stepping inside. But something in the back of his mind told him it was best not to. He turned away, but the feeling lingered. That night, as Jack lay in his bed, his mind kept drifting back to the room. Something about it felt familiar, as if he had seen it before in a dream, or perhaps a memory he couldn't quite place. His thoughts were interrupted by a strange noise, something light, but unmistakable. A tapping sound, like fingers gently rapping on the door of his room. Jack sat up, heart pounding. He glanced over at Lucas, who was fast asleep, oblivious to the noise. The tapping continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. Jack hesitated, unsure whether it had been real or just his imagination. But when the tapping began again, louder this time, his curiosity got the better of him. He got out of bed, careful not to wake Lucas, and walked to the door. He peered through the peephole but saw nothing, just the dimly lit hallway stretching out in both directions. Jack opened the door cautiously, scanning the area. It was empty. The hallway was silent, as if nothing had happened at all. Confused and unsettled, Jack shut the door and locked it. But as he crawled back into bed, a lingering unease settled over him. The tapping was gone, but the feeling remained. What was it? And who or what was making that noise? The next morning, over breakfast, Jack tried to shake off the experience. He and Lucas were planning to meet up with some classmates later in the afternoon, but something in the back of Jack's mind kept nagging at him. The door, the tapping. There was something more to this place, something dark and hidden. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. Pine Hill University wasn't the peaceful haven he had hoped for. It was a place where the past, twisted and forgotten, was waiting to be unearthed. And Jack, along with Lucas, was about to discover just how deep that darkness went. The next few days at Pine Hill University passed uneventfully, but Jack couldn't shake the unease he felt. He kept returning to that room at the end of the hallway in Hollis Hall, the one with the door left slightly ajar. He found himself walking past it more frequently, his curiosity gnawing at him. But he never had the nerve to open the door again. The more he thought about it, the more something seemed off. Like the building itself was hiding something from him. Lucas, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to Jack's growing discomfort. They spent their days attending lectures, meeting new people, and adjusting to campus life. But every time Jack passed by that door, something deep inside him told him it was only a matter of time before he had to confront whatever lay beyond it. It wasn't until the following weekend that the strange occurrences began to escalate. One evening, as Jack and Lucas were sitting in their room studying, they heard a noise from the hallway, a soft scraping sound, almost like something being dragged across the floor. It was faint, but distinct enough to make Jack pause mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" Jack asked, looking toward the door. Lucas, who was sitting across from him, looked up. "Hear what?" "The scratching sound," Jack replied. "It came from the hall." Lucas got up and walked over to the door, peering through the peephole. "I don't see anything," he said, shaking his head. "You're probably just hearing things." But Jack wasn't convinced. He had heard it clearly, and the sensation of being watched, the same feeling he had experienced a few nights ago, was growing stronger. It was as if something, or someone, was lingering just outside their room, waiting. Jack didn't say anything more, but the silence between him and Lucas grew, a heavy tension hanging in the air. That night, as they both lay in their beds, the noise came again, this time louder and closer. The scraping sound, as if something or someone was pacing up and down the hallway. Jack sat up, his heart racing. He glanced over at Lucas, who appeared to be asleep, completely unaware of the disturbance. But Jack couldn't ignore it. Slowly, he got up, his footsteps soft on the worn floorboards as he moved toward the door. He hesitated for a moment, then cracked it open, peeking out into the hallway. Nothing. The hallway was empty, just the faint, flickering light from the overhead lamp casting long shadows along the walls. He was about to close the door when he saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the hallway, just outside the room where that strange door was. It was a silhouette, barely visible, but Jack could make out a tall, shadowy figure standing still. For a moment, Jack's breath caught in his throat. The figure was gone before he could even blink. Shaken, Jack quickly shut the door and locked it. His pulse raced in his ears, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. What was that? Who or what was standing there? He crawled back into bed, trying to push the thoughts out of his head. But as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the image of the figure. Pine Hill University was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to escape the noise and chaos of the world, but now it felt like everything was closing in on him. The next day, Jack tried to shake off the fear. He didn't tell Lucas what he had seen, worried that it would sound crazy. But as they continued their routine, Jack couldn't help but feel like he was being drawn toward that room again. Like the university was pulling him into its dark secrets. That night, Jack couldn't resist any longer. He had to know what was behind the door. With his flashlight in hand and his heart pounding in his chest, he made his way down the hallway toward the door that had been haunting him for days. This time, he would open it. He would face whatever had been lurking in the shadows, and with every step he took, he could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, the darkness of the university wrapping itself tighter around him. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew one thing for sure. His life at Pine Hill would never be the same again. Jack stood in front of the mysterious door, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The air around him was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. His heart pounded in his chest as his mind raced with thoughts. What if he was wrong? What if there was nothing behind the door at all? But deep down, he knew there was something waiting for him, something he couldn't ignore any longer. He reached for the handle, feeling the cold metal under his fingertips. Slowly, he turned it, and the door creaked open with a sound that seemed far too loud for the stillness of the hallway. The light from his flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the room that lay beyond. The attic was dark, its contents obscured by the thick layer of dust that covered everything. Old furniture sat in corners, forgotten and abandoned. The floorboards groaned under Jack's weight as he stepped inside, the faint smell of decay and something musty filling the air. It was as if the room hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. Jack's eyes scanned the room, his flashlight dancing across the walls. Nothing, just the remnants of an old building. But then, something caught his eye. In the far corner of the room, barely visible, was an old wooden box. The box was simple, nothing special about it, but it had an odd aura about it, as though it was waiting for Jack to find it. He walked toward it, his feet heavy, as if the air itself was weighing him down. With trembling hands, he knelt down and opened the box. Inside, there was a stack of yellowing papers, tied together with a piece of string. Jack hesitated, then pulled the papers out, one by one, his fingers brushing against the brittle edges. The papers were old, almost ancient, and covered in what appeared to be handwritten notes, symbols, and sketches. As Jack flipped through the pages, his eyes widened in disbelief. The drawings seemed familiar, too familiar. One of the sketches showed the very building Jack was standing in, but with an eerie twist. The image depicted the entire structure surrounded by dark shadows, as though the building itself was alive. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He continued to scan the pages, feeling a strange pull toward them. The more he read, the more he realized that these weren't just random notes. They were a journal detailing the history of Pine Hill University, its founding, and the dark events that had been buried in its past. The last page was the most chilling. It contained a single line of text, written in a hurried scrawl. "The curse is tied to the land. Only those who face the truth can break it." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The curse? What curse? And why did it mention the truth? The journal didn't explain any further, leaving Jack with more questions than answers. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the attic, making Jack jump to his feet. His flashlight flickered once more before going out, completely. The room plunged into darkness, and Jack's heart raced. He fumbled around, trying to turn the flashlight back on, but it wouldn't budge. That's when he heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from the shadows. "Who's there?" Jack called out, his voice shaking. There was no answer, only the sound of the footsteps growing louder, closer. Panic surged through Jack as he backed away from the corner. He turned toward the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The air grew colder, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Jack's breath became visible in the air, a fog of fear clouding his vision. The footsteps continued, now right behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. Jack stood there, frozen, his breath coming in short gasps. The flashlight flickered back to life, and in the dim light, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, shifting in and out of view. It was the figure of a person, or what was left of one. The outline was distorted, blurry, as though the shadow was struggling to maintain its shape. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he took a step backward, not daring to take his eyes off the shadow. The temperature continued to drop, and the air around him thickened. He knew then that he wasn't alone in the room. Whatever haunted Pine Hill University, whatever dark force had been lurking here, had found him. He reached for the door handle, but before he could touch it, the shadow lunged toward him with a violent force. Knocking him to the ground, Jack screamed, but the sound was muffled, as though the air itself was swallowing his voice. He struggled, trying to break free, but the grip of the shadow was strong, suffocating. Just as he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, a bright light filled the room, blinding him. The shadow recoiled, vanishing into the air like smoke. Jack gasped for air, his heart racing. He pulled himself up, still shaking from the encounter. The room was empty once again, but Jack knew he wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was watching him, and he wasn't sure if he could escape. The darkness of Pine Hill University had revealed itself to him, and now there was no turning back. The curse had been set in motion, and Jack had unwittingly opened the door to its horrors. He could only hope he was strong enough to survive whatever came next. As Jack staggered to his feet, his mind raced with the terrifying realization that something far worse than he had imagined was unfolding. The shadow, the presence in the attic, was no coincidence. It was tied to the curse that had haunted Pine Hill University for decades, a curse that seemed to feed on fear and desperation. His flashlight, flickering weakly, cast ghostly shadows across the room, illuminating the eerie corners that had once felt so mundane. The air in the attic was thick with an unnatural cold, and Jack could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching him. He didn't know where to go or what to do. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but a deeper part of him, something he couldn't explain, felt drawn to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Taking a deep breath, Jack turned toward the staircase, the creaking sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet. The door to the attic, which had slammed shut only moments ago, stood before him, seemingly mocking his every move. He reached for the handle again, and this time it opened with ease, as if inviting him back into the darkness. Descending the stairs with shaky hands, Jack's thoughts wandered to the journal he had found. The curse, the land, the warning about the truth. He had to figure out what had happened here, what dark force had been unleashed all those years ago. and how it had tied itself to the very foundation of the university. His mind kept drifting back to the one chilling line in Abigail's diary. The curse is tied to the land. Was the land itself the source of the darkness? Or was it something deeper? Something tied to the university's history? The air outside the attic felt different now, lighter. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that it was just a facade. He was being drawn in, and there was no escaping it. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the light from his flashlight flickered once more. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. He could feel it, that presence again, closer now. But when he turned, there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, bathed in the dull light of the flashlight's glow. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was stretching around him, closing in from every side. Suddenly, the temperature dropped again, colder this time, like ice pressing into his skin. Jack's breath clouded in the air as a cold wind whispered through the hallway. He glanced nervously around, but the hallway seemed unchanged. No sign of the shadow, no sign of the figure that had pursued him in the attic. But Jack wasn't fooled. He could feel it. The oppressive weight of something ancient, something malevolent. His hand shook as he reached for the door to the main building, hoping to escape the suffocating atmosphere. He stepped into the corridor, his flashlight lighting the way as he moved cautiously forward. The building was eerily silent. Too silent. The walls seemed to close in on him, each step heavier than the last. His mind raced. Was there anyone else in the building? Was anyone else still here? The campus had been abandoned for years. At least that's what Jack had been told. But now, as the reality of the curse settled in, he wasn't sure what to believe. As he walked deeper into the building, Jack heard a faint sound. It was almost like a whisper, carried on the wind. His breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the source, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. There, at the end of the hallway, a door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling out from the gap. The whispering seemed to come from within, beckoning him forward. With a deep breath, Jack approached the door. The cold air followed him, thickening with each step. As he reached for the handle, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. His hand froze in midair, as if the door itself was alive, urging him to open it. But something told him to stop, to turn around and run, to leave before it was too late. But Jack was too far gone, His curiosity, his need to understand, pushed him forward. With trembling hands, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room inside was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as if they had a life of their own. Jack's flashlight flickered again, casting an eerie glow across the room. The air felt heavier in here, suffocating, as if the room itself was holding its breath. And then he saw it. An old wooden desk in the center of the room, covered in dust and cobwebs. On the desk sat a large, leather-bound book. The pages were yellowed with age, the cover worn and cracked. Jack's heart pounded as he walked toward it, his hands trembling as he reached for the book. The moment his fingers touched the cover, the room seemed to pulse, as though the very building was reacting to his touch. A sudden, sharp pain shot through Jack's head, blurring his vision. He stumbled back, the book falling to the floor with a heavy thud. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't move. It felt like the entire room was closing in on him, the walls pressing against his chest. And then, as quickly as it had started, the pain subsided. Jack's breathing was shallow, his heart racing as he picked up the book and opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols, written in a language he couldn't understand. But one thing was clear. The book was a key to unlocking the curse that had haunted Pine Hill University for generations. As Jack read the ancient text, he felt the weight of the curse pressing down on him. The truth, as terrifying as it was within his grasp. But was he ready to face it? Could he uncover the darkness that had been buried here for so long? The answer was clear. Jack had already come too far to turn back. The curse would not be easily broken, but the first step toward ending it had been taken. The truth was waiting to be uncovered, and Jack knew that, no matter what, he had to finish what he had started. As Jack's fingers traced the strange symbols in the book, he could feel a surge of energy, like the very air around him was coming alive with the power of the ancient curse. His heart pounded, and his breath grew shallow as the weight of the knowledge he was unlocking pressed down on him. The words on the pages were cryptic, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. The curse that had plagued Pine Hill University was not a simple legend or ghost story. It was something far darker, far more dangerous. The book spoke of rituals, old rites meant to summon spirits and bind them to the land. It mentioned the land itself, the very foundation of the university, as the anchor for the curse. The more Jack read, the more the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. The curse had been set in motion long before the university's construction, tied to the land's tragic past. The founding of Pine Hill University hadn't just been an academic endeavor. It had been an attempt to bury the darkness, to suppress a haunting force that had been there for centuries. Jack's mind raced as the implications of what he was reading set in. This wasn't just about a ghost or a spirit. It wasn't even about Abigail's tragic fate. It was about something far older, something tied to the land itself. The curse had never truly been lifted. It had just been hidden, dormant, waiting for someone to unlock the key. And now, that someone was him. His pulse quickened as he read a particularly chilling passage. Only through the blood of the innocent can the curse be broken. But such a sacrifice will unleash something far worse, something that cannot be controlled. The words seemed to burn into his mind, each syllable carrying the weight of a terrible truth. A sacrifice, an innocent life, the price for breaking the curse. Jack stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The room felt like it was closing in on him. He couldn't believe what he had just read. The curse was not just an old myth or a vengeful spirit. It was alive, and it required a life to feed its hunger. The university had been built on a foundation of bloodshed, and the curse had been waiting all these years to complete its terrible cycle. As the realization hit him, Jack's thoughts turned to Luke. His older brother had been with him from the beginning, and now, more than ever, Jack felt a deep sense of responsibility to protect him. He couldn't allow Luke to become part of this dark history. But the curse didn't care about his intentions. It was indifferent to who was caught in its grasp. And now, Jack had to face the truth. Breaking the curse would come at a cost, one that might be too high for him to pay. He knew he had to act fast. The longer he stayed in the university, the more powerful the curse would grow. The shadows in the corners of his mind seemed to whisper louder, urging him to finish the ritual. But Jack wasn't sure he could go through with it. Could he truly make the ultimate sacrifice? Could he allow an innocent life to be taken to lift the curse and save everyone else? His fingers still clutched the book, the ancient text almost pulsing in his hands. The weight of the decision hung over him like a storm cloud, and Jack could feel the pressure mounting. He couldn't do it alone. He needed help. But who could he trust? Everyone around him was either oblivious to the curse or too afraid to confront it. He had to find a way to break the curse, but not at the cost of another life. His mind began to spin as he thought about his options. He could leave Pine Hill University, escape before the curse fully awakened. But something deep inside told him that running away wouldn't solve anything. The curse had followed him here for a reason, and as much as he hated to admit it, he knew he couldn't just walk away. The only way out was through. He had to face the darkness head-on, even if it meant facing the consequences of his choices. The clock was ticking, and Jack knew that every second he hesitated was another second the curse grew stronger. He had to act, and he had to act now. With trembling hands, he slammed the book shut and stood up, determination hardening in his chest. There was no turning back now. He would confront the curse, whatever it took. And he would make sure that Luke and everyone else at Pine Hill University were safe, even if it meant sacrificing his own peace of mind. The final step was ahead, and Jack wasn't going to let fear stop him from finishing what he had started. The curse would be broken, or it would break him. Jack's heart was racing as he prepared for the final confrontation with the curse. The air in the room was thick with the weight of the ancient knowledge he had uncovered, and every step he took seemed to echo in the silence that surrounded him. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, fear, doubt, determination, but above all, a deep, overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had come this far, but he wasn't sure if he could go through with it. The curse was powerful, and the stakes had never been higher. He glanced at the worn pages of the book once more, scanning the final ritual instructions. The book had revealed everything he needed to know, yet it had given him no assurance of success. In fact, it had warned of failure, of how the ritual could backfire and leave a trail of destruction in its wake. The one who seeks to break the curse must be prepared to pay a great price, the text had said. Jack wasn't sure what that price was, but he felt a creeping sense of dread in his gut. He couldn't ignore the warning, but there was no time left for second-guessing. His brother, Luke, was in danger. And even if the ritual was flawed, even if there was a chance it wouldn't work, Jack had to try. Pine Hill University, the place that had once felt like home, was now a battleground between light and darkness. The curse had already claimed too much. He couldn't let it take anyone else. Jack's eyes flickered to the door. Luke was upstairs in their dorm room, blissfully unaware of the true danger lurking within the university's walls. It was up to Jack to protect him. He had no choice but to face the curse head-on, no matter the cost. With a deep breath, Jack grabbed the items he had gathered for the ritual: candles, herbs, and a vial of water from the university's oldest well, a place that was rumored to have ties to the curse. He made his way up to the attic, the final battleground. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jack could feel the weight of history pressing down on him with every step he took. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet seemed to whisper warnings. But he couldn't stop now. The attic door loomed in front of him, and he hesitated for only a moment before pushing it open. The air inside was cold, colder than he had ever felt it before. The shadows in the room stretched and twisted, as if they were alive, watching him. Jack's hands trembled as he set up the ritual, arranging the candles in a circle and placing the vial of water in the center. He could feel the energy in the room shifting, growing stronger as he began to chant the words from the book. As the incantation left his lips, the room seemed to pulse with power. The air thickened, and Jack could feel something stirring in the darkness. It wasn't just the curse. It was the spirit of Abigail, the woman who had set all of this into motion, still trapped in the limbo of her own creation. The room grew colder, the whispers louder, and Jack could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent inching closer. Suddenly, the air shifted. A figure appeared before him, a shadowy silhouette taking shape in the dim light. Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was her, the spirit of Abigail, but not as he had imagined. She wasn't just a woman in mourning. She was a force of pureness and sorrow, twisted by the curse that had consumed her. Her eyes glowed with an eerie light, and her voice was a low, mournful wail that echoed through the attic. "You dare to break the curse?" she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. You cannot undo what's been done. The price has already been paid." Jack stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'm not here to undo anything," he said. "I'm here to end the suffering, to free you and everyone else this curse has trapped." The spirit's eyes narrowed, her form flickering with violent energy. "You think you can save them? You think you can save yourself?" Jack's hands tightened around the vial of water. "I'm willing to face whatever it takes," he said, his voice rising in defiance. "This curse ends tonight." The figure lunged at him, but before Jack could react, a blast of cold air surged through the room. The candles flickered violently, and the whispers reached a deafening crescendo. The room seemed to warp, the very fabric of reality bending around him. Jack knew that this was it, the moment of truth. He had no choice but to finish the ritual, or everything he had worked for would be lost. With a final cry, Jack poured the water onto the floor, and the entire attic erupted in light. The spirit of Abigail let out a chilling scream, and for a moment, Jack felt his body being pulled into the darkness. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The temperature in the room returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the attic lifted. The curse had been broken. Jack stood there, panting, his heart racing. The room was still, quiet, and for the first time since he had arrived at Pine Hill University, he felt a sense of peace. The curse was over, but the cost of breaking it was something Jack would have to live with forever. He had saved his brother, his friends, and the university, but the darkness would always be a part of him now. He had faced the unknown, and in doing so, had emerged stronger than he had ever imagined. The price had been high, but Jack had learned one of the most important lessons of all. Sometimes, you have to confront the darkness within to find the light. The days following the ritual were quieter than Jack had expected. Pine Hill University, which had been a place of terror and dread for so long, was now shrouded in an unfamiliar calm. It was almost as if the campus itself was breathing easier, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slowly but surely. Jack's heart, however, was heavy. The burden of what had happened still lingered with him. He spent his days walking through the campus, often in a daze, unsure of how to process everything that had transpired. Luke, his brother, was now safe, untouched by the curse. But Jack could still see the shadows in his eyes. There was no going back to the way things were before. The horrors they had faced, the things they had learned, would stay with them forever. Jack knew that much. But as the days went on, he began to feel a strange sense of responsibility. The university had been saved, yes. But what about the other souls? The ones that were left behind? The whispers that had once filled the air, The figures that had haunted their nightmares. Where had they gone? Were they free? Or had they merely been pushed back into the shadows, waiting for the next person to stumble upon them? Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He had broken the curse, yes. But had he truly ended the suffering? Or had he simply shifted it into another form? The ancient forces that had been unleashed were powerful, and Jack had no doubt that there were more layers to the story than he had uncovered. His decision to stop the curse had been the right one, but he couldn't help but wonder, what else had he left behind? Luke noticed Jack's preoccupation. They sat together one evening, their dinner untouched, as they watched the sunset from their dorm room window. The quiet, peaceful evening was a stark contrast to the chaos they had faced just weeks before. "Jack," Luke began, his voice quieter than usual, "do you ever think we could have done things differently? Like, what if we hadn't gone through with it?" Jack paused, considering the question. It was a hard one he had thought about more than once since that night in the attic. "I don't know, Luke. I don't think we had much of a choice, did we?" he replied, his voice heavy with the weight of his own thoughts. "The curse was going to consume us all eventually, but I can't shake the feeling that there's still more to it." Luke looked at him, his brow furrowed in concern. "You think we made a mistake?" Jack shook his head. "I don't think it was a mistake, but something's different now. The campus feels lighter, sure, but it also feels emptier, like there's something missing. And I can't help but wonder if I've done more harm than good by breaking the curse. Maybe it wasn't ready to end." The room fell into a silence, both brothers lost in their own thoughts. Luke had been saved from the curse, but Jack's mind continued to race, seeking answers to questions that didn't have easy solutions. Then, in the quiet, a soft knock on the door broke the stillness. Jack looked up, his heart leaping in his chest. Could it be? He didn't know why, but something about the knock seemed familiar, almost ominous. He stood up, opening the door slowly. To his surprise, it was Professor Davis, a respected faculty member Jack had spoken with a few times during his time at Pine Hill University. But something about her face was different. Her eyes wide with concern, her usually calm demeanor replaced with visible unease. "Jack, Luke," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "There's something you need to see. Something that, well, I don't know how to explain it, but I think you're the only ones who can help." Jack exchanged a look with Luke, who was now standing beside him, equally confused. "What's going on, Professor?" Jack asked, his voice hesitant but filled with concern. "I don't know how to say this, but it seems that the curse, it's not over." "Not completely," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "We did the ritual. The curse was broken. It's over." Professor Davis shook her head. "I thought so too. But something's been happening on campus. Students are disappearing. Strange things are happening again. I don't know what to make of it, but I think you two might be the only ones who can help." Jack felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy fog. The relief he had felt just days before vanished in an instant. The curse wasn't truly gone. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Jack knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away. Not now. "We'll help you," Jack said, his voice steady. "Tell us everything you know." Professor Davis nodded, relief flooding her face. "It's not just a curse anymore. It's something much worse. and it's coming for all of us. The final chapter of their journey had arrived. Ethan and Luke had endured more than they ever imagined. But now, standing together in the now silent and peaceful attic, they had one final task to complete. The curse was broken. The terrifying whispers had stopped. And the house, once a place of dread, now seemed to offer a strange sense of relief. But the fight wasn't entirely over. The consequences of the haunting had been far-reaching. And even though they had confronted the darkness, they knew they could never go back to the way things were before. Ethan looked over at Luke, both exhausted but resolute. "Do you think it's finally over?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile peace that had descended upon them. Luke paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on the empty rocking chair that had once moved on its own, and the corner where the shadows had once seemed to come alive. "It's over, Ethan," he said, his tone firm yet thoughtful. "At least, for us." The brothers knew that their journey had transformed them. It wasn't just about solving a mystery or breaking a curse. It had been about facing their own deepest fears, the ones that they had buried for so long. For Ethan, it had been about confronting the haunting memories of their past, his fear of the unknown, and the doubt that had plagued him every time he thought he might be losing himself to something he couldn't understand. For Luke, it had been about finally allowing himself to be vulnerable, to let go of his stoic facade and acknowledge the emotional weight he had been carrying alone for years. As they prepared to leave the attic, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself had shifted in a way that they couldn't yet fully comprehend. The sense of oppression that once seemed to fill every corner of the home had disappeared. The air felt clearer now, lighter, as if the house was no longer holding on to the secrets it had once concealed so tightly. It was a strange kind of closure, one that felt both surreal and necessary. "I think we need to leave," Ethan said softly, looking toward the staircase leading down into the rest of the house. Luke nodded, but there was a somber look in his eyes. "Yeah, but we can't forget what happened here. The house, it changed us." Ethan turned to face him, his expression serious. "You're right. We've faced things that most people would never dream of, and somehow we made it through. But I think that's the lesson. We have to face our fears, no matter how dark they are, no matter how impossible it seems to overcome them." The brothers descended the stairs, the weight of their experiences still pressing on their shoulders, but no longer with the same sense of fear. The house seemed to welcome their departure, as if it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for them to let go of the ghosts of their past. But as they stepped outside into the cool, night air, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. "We did it," Ethan said, exhaling slowly, as if releasing all the tension he had been holding on to for so long. Luke placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did. But more than that, we learned something important." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Sometimes you have to confront the darkness in order to let the light back in," Luke replied, his voice soft but full of meaning. The brothers stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the house one last time. It had been a place of fear, of unknown forces, but now it stood quiet, empty. They knew they had broken the curse, but they also knew that the journey they had gone through would stay with them forever. The house had tested them, pushed them to their limits, but it had also taught them an invaluable lesson. Facing our greatest fears head-on is the only way to truly move forward. As the wind rustled through the trees and the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. Ethan and Luke turned away from the house and began walking, their steps steady and sure. It was a new beginning for both of them, one that would carry them into a future where nothing would ever feel quite as impossible as the darkness they had just conquered. And with that, they finally felt free. This final part of their story offers a crucial lesson: the power of confronting one's fears. It's easy to run from the unknown or avoid the things that scare us, but it's only by facing them directly that we can truly understand ourselves and find peace. The journey toward healing, growth, and self-discovery is never easy, but it's always worth it. The lesson here is not just about breaking a curse, but about breaking free from the fears that hold us back in life.